Hello, everybody, and welcome again to The Sacred Life. I'm excited to welcome you all again and talk to you tonight about a few stories that I have to share with you. If you've seen the thumbnail, the description, the posts on social media, and so forth about this episode, we are talking about a couple legends from medieval Switzerland, actually, from the region of Lucerne, canton of Lucerne in central Switzerland, and what is known as Mount Pilatus. And I thought that these are some interesting stories, some exciting stories about involving things like Pilate, the Pilate from the Bible, the Roman governor who was responsible for the trial of Christ, and then also some other legends kind of surrounding the mountain. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at these things tonight, to talk about these things, and kind of look at them from the perspective of that this is something like a medieval approach to theology and things like that. So when these medieval authors are telling these stories, they're not just engaging simply in telling stories, but rather the telling of these stories is how they are, like I said, how they're engaging in theology and things like that. So we are looking at these stories about Pilate and the mountain in central Switzerland, Mount Pilatus, which is a well-known and a famous mountain overlooking the city of Lucerne. It's a wonderful location. Before I go any further, once again, remind everybody, please check out the links in the description, ways that you can support The Sacred Life. Please consider becoming a channel member if you are not a channel member. You can also do things like super chats, things like that. Drop your comments. If you have questions about the video as we are talking, of course, consider, if you're watching this live, dropping those questions in the live chat, and we'll have some live back and forth about this as much as we're able. And of course, as always, I am the sponsor of this video with my iconography business, Gregorius Iconography. You can check out the links to that in the description. Would ask that you please consider purchasing some custom hand painted icons, ordering some custom commissions. I do custom work. I'm fairly open right now because I am also an apprentice to another more experienced iconographer. And if you're going to be in the area of Dallas, Texas next February, you can come check out the Orthodox Arts Festival. Throw in a shout out for that. I'm planning to be there together with my teacher, so you can come meet us there. I think that'll be a fun time. I'm looking forward to it. I think the organizers and everybody involved is looking forward to that as well. So anyway, let's move forward with these stories from medieval Switzerland, or at least concerning medieval Switzerland. So like I said, we're going to be talking about Pilate. So I want to first read to you a short story that is found in it's really quite a well-known it's quite a well-known story, or quite a well-known collection of stories from the Middle Ages. I think there's like over 1,000 copies of this particular work known to exist. It is the Legenda Aurea, which was written sometime around 1260, the year 1260. That is Latin. It means the golden legend. Yeah, like I said, it's a well-known medieval collection of legends and stories, and there's a short kind of excerpt here from it that I would like to read concerning Pilate and Mount Pilatus. And I think this is a really interesting story, a really interesting legend. So let's look at that to start off with. So it says, "But Pilate, after he had neglected the crucified Lord, was sent into exile in Gaul by Emperor Tiberius to Mount Pilatus, where he is tormented eternally for his sins. That mountain is called Pilatus, and on it there is a lake in which his body lies, stirring up storms. Whoever throws a stone into the lake, a violent wind arises and lightning falls. Now, however, through the cross, the mountain is tranquil. But if they remove the cross, the storm will return again. Pilate's body was thrown into the Tiber, and the Tiber was disturbed. afterward translated to the Rhone, and the Rhone in the same way. Finally thrown into Pilate's lake, where every Good Friday, when he tries to wash his hands, winds arise and lightning falls. Yeah, so this is I don't know. I think this is just a really interesting, a really fascinating story. Like I said, it shows some really neat things about how I guess you can say about how theology works in the Middle Ages. So if we look at this story, we see quite a lot of interesting things going on. The first thing I want to point to is that there is a motif that appears in this story that as we go forward, not necessarily in this episode, there may be some in this episode, but as like I guess continue what I would call this series, where I'm going to be looking at similar legends and at legends from across the region, from across the Swiss Alps. We're going to see this idea popping up over and over and over again about the cross being raised up to contain or to tame some sort of evil. But then there's this this idea always with that, like it says here. Let me find that line again. He says, now, however, through the cross, the mountain is tranquil, but if they remove the cross, the storm will return again. So this is a like again like a motif that shows up over and over again, where we see this idea that the cross, again, like I said, is erected to contain some sort of evil, and that if the cross is removed, whatever evil it would be, very often in these stories, it is a dragon that is being contained, and we're going to look into that earlier. There's stories about dragons concerning Mount Pilatus as well that I think are actually related to the story of Pilate in a way. But anyway, we see this idea over and over again about the cross being erected to contain some kind of evil, or to I don't know, to pacify some kind of evil. And if the cross is removed, or if the cross is neglected, if the cross is allowed to fall, then this evil will return. And it's pretty fascinating to me that this is such an important motif in these legends in this region in particular. I'd really be interested in exploring and finding, is this motif is this common in medieval Europe in general? Is this a regional emphasis? How does that work out? I guess I don't really know, but this is just something that's really striking to me. It's something like we see it so prominently, so often, like in pretty much all of these stories, as far as it concerns Swiss hagiographies, Alpine, like central Swiss Alpine hagiographies, stories of these saints. That there's always, this raising up of the cross, or this planting of the cross in some place, or making of the sign of the cross, and just this like this message being left for us, like we need to maintain the cross. We need to make sure the cross is not removed, the cross does not fall, or the evil will return. And it's really interesting to me because it is pointing to something about our Christian faith and the exercise of the Christian faith, and also the way like ancient and medieval Christians encountered the faith and perceived the faith. And so like the cross here, what we'll see as we go forward into these legends, like I said, both tonight, but also as I kind of go forward with this series, exploring these saints' lives and these legends, medieval legends from this region. Like we're not necessarily getting into any saints' lives tonight, but this is definitely a motif that we're going to see repeatedly and very prominently as we look into the lives of saints. So like I said here, all of the all the major elements that we're going to see in the couple of stories that we're looking at tonight, we're going to see repeated over and over again as we look into hagiographies, into saints' lives from the region as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit, like I guess continue talking, that is, about this this idea of the cross being erected. So what we see in these stories is that like the cross is very often I think in these stories, the cross is being used kind of to signify I guess, what I would call the spiritual warfare that is going on. So it's like it's really common, kind of across eras, really, because we have hagiographies, we have saints' lives and legends like this one that pertain to things that happened very early on in the history of Christianity. So we have some saints' lives that pertain to saints in like the first or very early second century. So, for example, the legend of Saint Beatus, who is something like the first the first apostle, the first evangelist to the Swiss Alps, to the Swiss people. And then we have stories associated with Saint Maurice and the Theban Legion, and a number of saints and another number of saints associated with the Theban cult, I guess you could call it. That so this is like third century, mid to late third century, and then we have later stories from like the sixth century. So like there's this wide time span that these saints' lives cover, but this dragon motif is very very prominent in this idea of raising the cross up, to kind of contain this evil that is driven back either through the slaying or imprisoning of a dragon. Um, Also things like delivering people from demonic possession is very closely related, tied into all of these stories as well. Like a very very common, very frequent motif. And again, like I said, as we continue to look through these stories over the I don't know, over the coming number of episodes, we'll see those same things, same themes propping up over and over and over again. And I think this story is particularly interesting because it kind of like shows a sort of a foundation, for a lot of these motifs that we see. John has come into the show here, so I'm going to add him to the stage. Um, there we go. I added you to the stage appearing on the screen. I was trying to figure out why.
Yeah.
Let me adjust that. There we go. I don't know which one I like better. Maybe I like this one better. Which one do you like better?
This looks like too much of my face right now. It's
All right.
late. I'm got my puffy eyes going on.
Yeah, yeah. You got your stupid shirt
Stupid shirt. This not my jammies or anything.
and your electric guitar and your bass and
Yeah, I know. I don't hardly play any electric instruments. My electric instruments are the ones that hang on the wall because I don't use them.
Yeah, every time John's on the show, when we're like live streaming like this, and he has his instruments in the background. After we go off the air, he always complains about about which instruments are on. It's like these aren't the instruments I ever play, and people are thinking this is anyway.
Yeah. But I do
John,
have the banjo. Gives me some credibility, but I don't really play the banjo either. So
yeah, I guess
that
I don't
doesn't
have
help.
my banjo in the room with me here right now, or else I'd bring mine up and play a little
Yeah.
ditty for you. I probably wouldn't actually, but I don't know if you had anything to say. If you've caught what I've been talking about so far.
Yeah, most of it. I didn't catch every last bit of it. But you mentioned the sign of the cross, and I'd commented to you. I don't. There's a lot of different versions of the St. George story.
Yeah.
But the English version, the medieval English version, in the Golden Legend, he's like constantly making the sign of the cross, and it's kind of striking, like just how often he's doing it. Whenever there's something that's about that's important that he has to do, then he's going to make the sign of the cross, and that is going to be when he's confronting a dragon. And it's so often, it's like it's beating you over the head with this. Like if you're going to undertake something like this, you're going to confront a dragon, or you're going to face demons, and not just the demon that confronts you as an individual, but that confronts a community.
Yeah.
Then there's no way to do it unless like you follow the cross.
Now you mentioned the medieval English version, and then you mentioned with that the Golden Legend. Now is that the same Golden Legend that I'm talking about here? The medieval text from Jacobus de Voragine.
Yeah, and so I said English, but that was kind of a misnomer because it's in Latin.
Right.
But
and Jacobus de Voragine, he's an Italian bishop.
Yeah, it was super popular in England, and St. George, he's the patron saint of England, so this was like a major story.
Yeah, right. So that story that I was reading just a minute ago is from that same collection.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why I wanted to call that out. Like, it's like, oh yeah, we're actually talking about the same book here.
Yeah.
So
I didn't hear you mention the name of the book. I actually missed that part of it. But
I probably said it in Latin and not.
No, I probably just wasn't tuning in at that point.
Just talking about so I was just like running over kind of the motifs that are laid down in this story, and kind of the question I have is, so I'm bringing out these elements that are going to be really, really important, in particular to like local Swiss Alpine saints' lives and legends and stories, and like you're talking about St. George the Dragon, and there is this I don't know, like there's this extreme prominence with this dragon motif in the Swiss legends. I think I mentioned to you and in a text I sent you yesterday that there's like 7 hagiographies from the Bernese Oberland, which is the region our family is from, and 5 of them involve dragon slayings or dragon containment of some kind, and the 2 that don't are just like one sentence, little brief mentions of, hey, there was a saint, and this is the day that he's commemorated.
Yeah.
Actually, I think one of the 2 is just like a brief mention of like there's a miracle associated with Mary Magdalene. So it's like every significant hagiography associated with the region has something to do with the dragon slaying, but that pattern pretty solidly holds out across the country, across the region. Like when you expand into central Switzerland and then the eastern Swiss Alps, like this, like basically every saint who shows up kills a dragon, or imprisons one or something like that. But also every single one of these stories has something to do with like, okay, I've taken care of the dragon, but if you neglect the cross, the dragon is going to come back. Like even if I killed it, the dragon is going to come back. I just think that's really interesting, and that'd be a good question to ask you, because I know you studied some hagiographies from other parts of Europe, and I think particularly England. Is this really a motif that's so prominent elsewhere, or am I right in thinking that this is an interesting emphasis in the region?
Let's see. I don't know if I would say like I'm versed enough to make a real strong thesis, on that question. But one thing I want to emphasize with it is that what you could call the cult of the saints meets with criticism from Protestants because it's like a distraction from Christ. Like that should be your focus. You and Jesus, your relationship with Him, and anything else is like superfluous, and like off topic or whatever. And a lot of these stories, when you read them, there's so much focus. Like I said, with the St. George as the example, like it's just over and over again. There's so much focus on the cross that it's actually kind of hard to read those stories and engage in them and not see that these are so obviously pointing to Christ. And I read a couple of these with my classes in public high school, which is sort of difficult to do because because the cross is everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say because they're so Christian, but like you can do something with a certain degree of Christian storytelling, but the cross is just everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because, like I said at the beginning, I don't know if you, John, if you caught the very beginning, But one thing I wanted to say about these like these legends, these saints' lives, and these stories is that this is really how you do theology in the Middle Ages. So yeah, like yes, like I would say this is the primary means by which people do theology in the Middle Ages. Like yes, we have like the writings of Thomas Aquinas and Thomas a Kempis, and I don't know other theological writings as the two that come off of. But like I know there's quite a number of these as well. But like telling stories and especially the lives of saints, like I know we're not really telling any saints' lives tonight, but we're telling like stories that are like very closely connected with the genre of hagiography and martyrology from the Middle
Yeah.
Ages.
Yeah,
And
well,
it's
it's
like,
kind of, you have a sort of anonymous saint in the story there.
yeah, you do kind of, and like the next one that we'll tell, there's kind of an anonymous saint associated with it as well. Um, but yeah, like so, like I said, like it's very much saint adjacent, and like I think that's going to be like generally true for any like really any medieval story is that even if it's not explicitly a hagiography, there's pretty much always going to be a saint involved with it, or so it's going to be like very closely, like it's going to be very religious. It's going to be very
Hmm.
Christian, like you said. It's like it's hard to tell these stories in the setting of a public school because things like the cross are going to feature so prominently. But like I thought it was interesting, like what you were like, what I gathered you were bringing out there is that these saint stories, and like this is like really obvious in these Swiss saint stories, is that they're always directly pointing you towards the cross. And so like very often what happens is that these saints like they take on a dragon, like I said, pretty much always.
Hmm.
um, there's like a lot of other miracles and things in the lives of these saints associated with them. um, it seems like by like the 11th century when we start having extensive texts from this region, it becomes like every saint fights a dragon at some point in his life. And I just think that's interesting, because like it does say something pretty significant about what a saint really is, and how medieval people perceive the life of a saint. Uh,
Hmm.
but then, like going beyond that, like they're not necessarily like they're pretty much never fighting the dragon off by like their own bravado, but
Yeah,
rather
right.
with the sign of the cross.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it is interesting because that's a really big contrast to the way that, I mean, because dragon stories exist outside of the Christian world too, and dragon slaying stories.
right.
Um, but you have like this sort of pure heroism in a pagan story of fighting a dragon,
Yeah,
and
right.
you
Which
have
is
this like uh, I mean, there's still like an impressive, bravery and heroism in the hagiographies that are telling dragon slaying stories. But it's like rooted in um, like perfect following of Christ.
yeah. Um,
And so
yeah,
so there's stories. I mean, I kind of mention it just because there's the stories are so like so thoroughly pointing to Christ, and the stories are treating the saint as like um, I mean, you might use the phrase "the hands and feet of Christ." People, Protestants, will say that about like we are this, we are the hands and feet of Christ. We are like his body that's doing real work in this world right now. But in the same story, like you just have this emphasis that like, okay, it's other people too. It's not just you are the hands and feet of Christ, but there's some people actually who have done it a lot better than you.
yeah, right. Yeah, which is like something I want to throw in like real quickly as like a I don't know, like a defense of the cult of saints, the medieval cult of saints, or like what you see in Orthodoxy or Catholicism, is that like the point of saints, and like I guess like I said, the cult of saints is never that these are like intermediaries that we need, like that somehow take the place of Christ in our life, but rather they I don't know. There's something like examples to us about like how the life of Christ is embodied in the history of the church and the history of the world through these people's lives. And like I really like that for myself because like we can look at these people and we can see like when we're trying to like figure out how am I going to be Christ-like in my own life. That's not always so easy to work out. But then when we see these examples, here's people living the life of Christ, and here's Christ living through the lives of these people. And it's like it's something I can lay my hands on. And I think part of the reason why that's true is because um, each of us embody Christ in a way that is particular to ourselves. But there have been people in the history of the church that are, I don't know, like me. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, but it's also you have this like fairy tale type of storytelling that's going on, where like um, it's hard to see like, oh, I'm going to confront a dragon or something, like the person in the story. Like I think there's still an element where you don't see yourself like literally walking in the footsteps of these people doing the same types of things they did. And yet there's still something in that type of storytelling that's that does feel very applicable to you. I mean, I mentioned fairy tale type of storytelling. If you're reading a fairy tale, like you're not imagining that if you prick your finger on a thorn, you're going to fall asleep for 100 years or something like that. And yet there's I don't know how to explain. There's something in the storytelling, in this like very distant type of storytelling that seems very distant from my real life, that yet makes it actually really easy for me to step into it and see myself there.
Yeah. So I guess like continuing to look at this story, let's sorry, I scrolled away from it. Let me bring it back up. Let's look at let's look at a little bit of the details of the story, I guess, before we move on to the next story I want to tell, like relating to the same mountain. So there's like a number of earlier medieval legends that have that like kind of have this basic idea about like Pilate being exiled and tormented, like eternally tormented. Like Emperor Tiberius sending him in exile to various places. And I'm not sure like quite how the legend by this period in history winds up with him being exiled to central Switzerland to the top of a mountain. I don't know if you'd have any observations on that, like symbolically, like how it is, like sometimes he's like deposed from his position and retired to some city in Italy, like to or something like that. Then by the 13th century, it becomes he is like exiled to Gaul, and his body is cast into a lake at the top of a mountain.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I hadn't given too much thought to that. One thing, like these legends of Pilate are interesting in part because Pilate is not altogether an unsympathetic character, where you like Pilate tries to persuade the people to set Jesus free.
Yeah.
And they refuse to do it. And and he says he washes his hands of this whole thing. This isn't on him or whatever. Which like I say, it's not unsympathetic. Like if you look at yourself being in his position, then you would see like, well, I guess I guess that's probably what I would do. I would try to get the guy off.
Yeah, but there's like a really interesting element in this story as it's recorded here in the Golden Legend that he's like every Good Friday when Pilate tries to wash his hands, then the storms rage. So it's like,
yeah,
I don't know, like that brings to mind to me like a famous I don't know, like I guess it's kind of well known in Indiana, but I think it's actually well known across the country. Is like was it in like the 60s or the 70s, the Good Friday tornadoes, where there's like this massive storm that sweeps across the country, and like at the time was like maybe the biggest tornado outbreak that had been recorded.
yeah. Although that's Palm Sunday.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was Palm Sunday.
Yeah.
But I guess I do remember some pretty vivid Good Friday storms
Yeah.
when we were kids. I don't know that that's really related to Pilate trying to wash his hands, but I love this imagery that's like, you know, Pilate is like eternally trying to wash his hands.
Yeah, right.
But like the result of it is like, I don't know if you could say it's something like his anguish and his torment like expresses itself or like floods out into the world in this kind of like divine symbolism. That this is kind of like how it strikes me when I read that line. You know, like there's this wind and this lightning when Pilate is trying to wash his hands. It's just like there's like this very powerful element of that is like, this is not like Pilate. This is not something that you can actually wash your hands in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know that there's going to be a really strong Macbeth connection, but this sounds like so much like Macbeth too, with Lady Macbeth in particular, like sleepwalking and trying to wash her hands off. Macbeth himself said, to paraphrase, "Will these hands ever be clean? No, if I dip them in the oceans, they'll just turn the whole ocean red." But again, this sense like you commit a sin that can't be washed away, and you're going to keep trying to wash it away.
Yeah, I mean, and it is interesting because like I think there's a degree to which we all understand this element of trying to wash our hands, because it's like when we sin, I don't know, I feel like that's like a very natural response that somebody has when they've done something that they know is evil, like, or even that they like subconsciously realize is evil. It's like, I feel like my hands are dirty and I need to wash them with this. But it's just like,
but with Pilate, the thing that's interesting though is like, the sin is something everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And yet he's still not able to wash his hands of it. I mean, he has responsibility over it. So he's not just some guy, you know.
Yeah.
But the reason this is all happening isn't because of him.
Yeah, I mean, there's some sorry, I'm getting a comment here that there's some echo. Let me that's actually probably my fault, the way I probably have my laptop's volume up too high. Let me fix that. Anyway, there's actually like some elements very early on in the Christian tradition. Like I think if you read things like the Acts of Pilate, you see Pilate portrayed in this almost sympathetic kind of way. Pilate's wife is I think at least sometimes, maybe all the time, I'm not sure, is actually considered a saint in the Christian tradition. Like she is a righteous woman, and I think like according to the tradition, like goes on to become a Christian. But like I said, like in things like the Acts of Pilate and some very, very early Christian sources, you see Pilate portrayed in this almost sympathetic kind of way, but as like a tragic figure. It's much later on he becomes a villain of the story. But there's I think you can say there's kind of this element in which Pilate is a villain, but not by choice.
Yeah, right.
He's
Yeah,
kind of
I don't say these things in defense of Pilate, but just to say that, well, I mean, I think there's something very appropriate in like in legends of Pilate facing this sort of punishment. and yet it seems like wouldn't you do the same thing if you were in that position?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a mirror onto your own faults rather than a defense of Pilate.
Yeah, right. And I think that's something that's important. Is like the Pilate figure in the Christian tradition really is kind of a mirror. Which I like a lot of figures really in the grid, and I think that's kind of how we should relate to saints to a degree as well. Is like saints can be mirrors of the virtuous side of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and figures like Pilate, like obviously are the opposite of that. Um, and I think that's one thing that kind of arises with the traditions of Pilate is that not everybody who is a villain because they are like maliciously evil. So some of these medieval sources of Pilate will include things like let me look at this here. Like we have a source from around 860 that mentions that Pilate, after the crucifixion of Christ, this source also mentions that he's sent into exile, not to Mount Pilatus, not to Gaul, but it just mentions that uh, he was sent into exile and then winds up hanging himself like Judas did. And so, this is part of the Christian tradition as well. As like that Pilate for the rest of his life is tormented by this. And I think you would be, like, honestly, if you were in Pilate's position, and you saw the things that he saw. And like, if you read something like the Acts of Pilate or the Gospel of Nicodemus, and you see like the other things associated with the trial of Christ in the life of Pilate, um, you would imagine, like, if these things are true, this person would certainly be tormented by what happened and his role in it, even if he was kind of like a tragic figure in the whole story. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, you'd asked about the mountain, and I don't I don't know that I've got a whole lot to say on it, but I'll just make whatever comments I can. That uh, your mountain, you could call it Axis Mundi, which would be like um, the union of heaven and earth, but also with like hell buried underneath it. Um, a place of encounter with God, and you could say that would make it an appropriate place of judgment. Um, and if you've got like a lake on the mountain where a dragon lives, and I said like hell can be underneath your mountain, or it can be like underneath your Axis Mundi or whatever. Um, but I don't know. I mean, those are just like some symbols that would kind of commonly be attached to that.
yeah,
So Pilate is like maybe he's just on the mountain because that's a seat of judgment, and that's a place where he's still trying to wash his hands.
yeah. Well, okay, so there's something interesting actually to bring about that. Which I think kind of relates to the symbolism of the Alps in particular. Like, as far as mountains go, the Alps are really interesting mountains because, if for example you're somebody who follows Jonathan Peugeot or the Lord of Spirits, or people like that, and you hear them talking about like the general symbolism of mountains, mountains being high places, or mountains being places where we encounter the divine. um, there's all sorts of other things about what mountains are. Mountains representing like where heaven and earth meet is another way you can look at it as well.
Hmm.
You have this symbolism of the mountain of God in the Bible, and the mountain of God not necessarily being a geographic location, but more like being a symbol. And so like there's that element of a mountain as well. But then there's another element of a mountain, which is a mountain can also be like a terrifying place. And Swiss mountains are very often terrifying places associated um, with like dark spiritual powers. And in Switzerland, that tends to be dragons. Like dragons tend to live inside of mountains. in Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
like in caves within the mountains. Like and mountains being like the abodes of terrifying spirits. And so, these mountains, like it really is interesting. Like I think it's interesting, like to see these stories, like so much involve like a dragon being fought on a mountain and then a cross being placed on top of the mountain to kind of contain the evil. But like actually, if you go there today, you will find at the top of pretty much all of these mountains, there is still a cross. And like I liked that when I was there. Like you climb up to the top of the mountain and there's a cross up there.
Yeah.
Uh, but I just think that's really interesting, like kind of the interplay of those two symbols. And I think part of it is like what is the encounter of the mundane and the divine if you're like a pagan living under demonic tyranny. And I would say it's terrifying. And like maybe it's something of oppression and evil and fear, and that like that really stands out when you're reading a lot of these stories. And I think we'll see that in future, I guess, in future episodes when we read more of these stories, is that very often these mountains are terrifying places. And there's a naturalistic element involved with that, because if you're talking about like very tall mountains like the Alps are, then when you get to the top of the mountain, then they're cold and they're windswept and there's storms and they're very inhospitable places. Like you can't live up there. Like you'll freeze to death or the storms will kill you. A lot of these mountains are very, very difficult to summit. So like, yeah, like I said, there is that naturalistic element to it, but even like that naturalistic element is closely tied in with the symbolic element. Like they're not, um, I don't know, they're not opposed to each other in any way. But so like there's like this element here in which like here is this very wild nature, which is like very, very closely connected with this very wild and terrifying spiritual realm. And these things are like conquered and subdued by the cross. And I think I don't know, there's some really deep and interesting and powerful symbolic elements involved with that. And I think it relates to this thing that I was bringing out earlier about like why it is that dragons are so central and so important in Swiss hagiographies. Like it seems to me more so than is typical. And I think a lot of it relates to that. Like I don't know, like how do you relate to the world around you um, in Christianity versus paganism? And how do you relate to that spiritual element of the world? Like I guess to tie what I'm saying together again, like tying that back to like what is a mountain to you? What is the place where heaven and earth meet to you? If if you're a pagan, and what heaven or the spiritual realm represents are these like terrifying demonic powers.
Yeah, right. Not earlier we were talking about the role of the cross was playing in the stories and the sign of the cross and all that, and then you're bringing up now like, well, that's part of your physical environment too,
Right.
um, because you still climb up the mountain and have some type of spiritual experience. I mean, like anybody who hikes up a mountain is going to have some kind of spiritual experience or whatever. Um, and if you're building a cross there, you're um, um, like you're showing people what does it mean to have the type of experience you have when you climb a mountain, and what type of experience should you be having in this moment. That kind of becomes a model for who you are and how you live your life as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I don't know, like this element, I don't know, it is particularly interesting to me. Why don't we actually go ahead and move on to the next story?
What do
And
we've got our Cooper was our character in here, right? That's
Yeah, that's in the next story. Yeah.
Oh, in the next one. Okay, sorry, because
Yeah,
I
we haven't.
actually missed the telling of this story. But
Yeah, we haven't got to the Cooper yet. We'll get to that
okay,
in this one.
okay,
So this is I think the version I have here that I've brought up is kind of like a a more modern telling of the story, but not like a modern version, but like a like somebody later on telling the same story that is recorded somewhere else. And so he's like talking about where it's recorded, which is yeah. Well, anyway, I'll just read it. So he says, "There's very few residents of Lucerne who have not seen the writing." This is translated from a German, actually a Middle High German source. "There are very few residents of Lucerne who have not seen the writing on a vestment robe in the Abbey Church of Saint Leodegar. Depicted here is the very miraculous and believable story that deals with a certain cooper or barrel maker, an inhabitant of said city, plus two dragons or lindworms. Unfortunately, due to carelessness or other circumstances, the day, year, and name of the man are now forgotten. Some believe it happened 100 years ago, but others say it was about 130 years ago. And for the record, this was written, I think, about 1548. So 100 years or 130 years before that. One day in fall time, said Cooper went to Mount Pilatus to find material for his handicraft. Again, this is actually a much longer version of the story than what I had shared with you earlier, John. In case you're you're confused by that.
okay.
Um,
Yeah, what you shared with earlier said you did say that was from the Golden Legend, but that's okay.
um,
Go on.
Yeah. So anyway, one day in fall time, said Cooper went to Mount Pilatus to find material for his handicraft. Some people believe that it happened on Mount Rigi because there is a greater abundance of saplings for the hoops to be found there. While looking for saplings to cut barrel hoops, he unexpectedly and suddenly fell into a very deep crevice or cave. Because of his hard fall, he lay there unconscious for some time. When he came to himself, he found that he could not get out of his new lodging, for no human help was at hand. Instead, he found himself in the company of and between two large, frightening, and monstrous dragons. Just think of this terror lying there. But miraculously, he was not at all harmed by these beasts. He had nothing to eat, and he did not know how the monstrous animals styled their hunger. He finally saw that both lindworms were constantly rising up and licking the cliffs at the side of the cave. He too then licked the same cave cliffs and felt refreshed. Thus he miserably spent the entire winter in this situation, not having any food other than what he got from licking the cliffs with two lindworms. With the arrival of spring, one lindworm flew from the cave, which it could easily do with the help of its wings. The one that was left caressed the poor man as if it wanted to make him understand that because of the approaching summertime, he too should leave the cave. While the lindworm made preparations to fly away, the man, without doubt, having been inspired by God, took hold of the lindworm's tail. Holding on it with his power and strength, he was thus pulled to freedom. The good man, whose family had given him up for dead, returned to Lucerne following a half year of imprisonment with horrible company. To thank God Almighty and to immortalize the event, he had a beautiful vestment robe embroidered in silk, with an image of himself in a cave seated between two dragons. This can still be seen in the Abbey Church of Saint Leodegar. The cooper, now accustomed to natural food and drink, died a half year following his return home. So this is one version of the story, and then there's another version of the story that I guess is a little less favorable towards the dragons and depicts them as I don't know, sort of like as beasts, as this story does, as beasts that are somehow tamed. But in the other version of the story, and I think this is what I had shared with you, John, and I'd seen some other sources as well, that kind of result in the dragons then telling the Cooper is like, yeah, we're like, this is kind of my paraphrase. That it's like, yeah, we're like under control now, but that's only because of the cross. And if you remove the cross, then we're going to become terrible monsters again,
Hmm.
essentially.
Yeah.
Um, And so like that is, like I said, like this is like a late medieval or early modern, like Renaissance era version of the story. And I think there are some, I think there are some other like more medieval versions of the story that are closer to like the paraphrase that I just gave. I was trying to track down all those sources, and I don't know, it's complicated when you're dealing with these medieval sources, to actually find, I don't know, to actually find good sources.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you had some comments when we were texting about this about the Cooper,
Yeah.
and
Well, you also the Cooper in the other story was connected with the with Pilate more.
mm-hmm.
Um, but okay, so yeah, a couple of things. I mean, a Cooper is going to make a barrel. Um,
Right.
so he will a barrel. I mean, you can put water in a barrel, of course. Like you have this sort of like taming the flood and making it into something that's useful and valuable. Which in a way is the same thing. Like he didn't tame the dragons in the story that you're just telling,
Mm-hmm.
but he's sort of like in a way like um, able to not master the dragons themselves, but to like contain the useful thing in them.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Um, and it's like it doesn't have to be obvious that he tames the dragons. If it's like, the Cooper is the one that's able to have a productive relationship with dragons.
yeah, right. Now I don't know. I mean, maybe you can make a connection to some of the stories here.
Um, so one thing well, I guess one thing I was kind of mulling over in my mind, is like, what is the connection to there being a dragon that inhabits the mountain where Pilate is buried? Like in local, like I read the story I read from the Golden Legend, it like involves the body of Pilate winding up in various places at various times. Um, but like in the local folklore about Mount Pilatus in the region of Lucerne, like generally involves like, hey, this is the burial place of Pilate, and that's why it's called Mount Pilatus. There might be other explanations out there as well for why that's its name, but so yeah, like that's what's like in the local memory and the local folklore is like, hey, here's where Pilate is buried, and just relating to like, okay, so how does that relate to there being a dragon there? Um, and part of what I see in that is like, well, the burial place of Pilate is going to be somewhere that is tainted and corrupted, and part of what a dragon is like a symbol of taint and corruption. That's not everything that a dragon is, but like a dragon is like an embodiment of like a tyrannical evil force, which I think is like also kind of like what Pilate is. Like Pilate, I think on one hand is like a stand-in for the tyranny of Rome in the story of the crucifixion. um so yeah, I'm trying to work out like how does this dragon motif and a dragon inhabiting a cave on Mount Pilatus relate to this, relate to Pilate. And I think it does. I'm just like, I'm not entirely certain how to connect the dots there.
Okay, well, there's one thing I'll say before I'll make a Pilate comment soon. But the dragon is not only like a tyrannical, monstrous, destructive force. And in the story you were just telling with the Cooper, they seem like at least potentially very dangerous, but they don't present danger for him. Instead, they show him that he can lick the rocks and live, and they also like have affection for him, and then help him out of the cave or out of the hole ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And so like everything they do in that story actually is very positive for him.
Yeah.
And as you said, some versions of the story will say, well, that's because of the cross, but it remains that even so, like that they are potentially very positive things.
Mm-hmm.
So dragon, I mean, if you would just associate the dragon with like the chaos and mystery and unknown and uncontrollable, then you have something that is on the one hand a very destructive force,
Mm-hmm.
but on the other hand is like a potential like place where you can go for wisdom,
Yeah.
and for riches, you know.
Yeah, and I think there's an element that's important there, and I guess this is kind of like a teaser for a I don't know, the ongoing series as we look into like this alpine folklore, is there is kind of this element in which like the wild spirits of the mountains are tamed by the cross and kind of turned into what you might call helpful spirits, and like especially thinking of like stories relating to dwarves, um like alpine dwarves, which are like generally helpful creatures, but if you get on their wrong side, then they'll slight you. But
Yeah.
then but in like this interesting way, it's like their trickery and their slighting of you. Like the person, I don't know. They're like there's this really fascinating element with the Swiss dwarves that like when you get on their bad side and you like you try to take advantage of them and then they curse you somehow. That the people that do this wind up becoming like rich and famous later on
Hmm.
after they've learned their lesson.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and so what I'm trying to bring out with that is like there really is this fascinating element in the folklore that these terrifying spirits um, are kind of tamed by the cross, and when they're tamed by the power of the cross, they're helpful.
Hmm.
But like when the cross is neglected, in the case of the dwarves, they just kind of vanish and go away. Um, or like in the case of the dragons, it's like no, these beings that are now contained, and I think part of what it means to be contained is like what you're saying is to like you can find usefulness from them when they're no longer being contained, and you know what causes them to not be contained is again neglecting the cross. Um, then now they're going to become terrifying, horrible monsters again. And like one story with one saint's life, um, you know, I don't know how much I want to go into this now because I think I want to do another episode or even multiple episodes looking deeper into this motif of the Swiss dragon. Um, but I'll briefly mention this here because it's relevant to what we're saying. Is like one of the saints' lives from the Oberland like includes a distinct warning. It's like, well, if you allow the cross to fall, then the pagan knight will return. So it's like if you allow the cross to like I don't know, it's like it's portraying this I don't know this pre-Christian era as night, as darkness, and yeah, I know that they're just very interesting, like tying all these symbols, like working all these things out, and we just see how um I don't know, like I like this idea, I guess, that you were bringing out, like here's how the dragon is useful. um Here's how
Yeah. I
you
mean, like
tame your dragon as well.
Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh as being useful and valuable, and a blessing, you know, and says all things work together for the good of those that love God. And so, like the force that could be very destructive, that could present temptation, can also be the thing that, um, like that leads to salvation or leads to blessings in life.
Hmm.
Um, and in the story of the temptation of Christ, Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tempted. There's like to be tempted, like that's the language that's used in there, like indicating like this was the purpose. This is
Hmm.
why he went there, was to face temptation.
Right.
And when he does, then um, it seems to me in the telling of the story this way, and maybe this is not like the right way to talk about Jesus and his ministry or motivation or whatever, but it would be right to talk about a person who's like following the pattern of Christ, to say that it seems like in facing that temptation, his purpose becomes more clear and his dedication to his purpose becomes stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I mean, it may feel like not quite right to talk about Jesus in that way, but I think like for the Christian, that's what you do, is like you go and you face that monster, and when you do, you actually gain clarity.
Yeah. So let's look at an element. Then this is occurring to me as you're saying this, that relates to that, is why. So we're talking about a cooper, the barrel maker, and as somebody who can like put a boundary around things and contain it, so that you can contain the useful things, and like preserve them and hold on
Mm-hmm.
to them and carry them. And it just what's striking me as you're saying this is like, okay, but the cooper is climbing up to the top of a mountain to get the materials that he needs to make his barrels.
Yeah.
I think there's something symbolically significant about that, because like I've been to these mountains. I've never been to Mount Pilatus, but I've been to the Swiss Alps, and it's like, yeah, climbing to the top of the mountain to get materials for making barrels actually doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
like for one thing, there actually aren't trees at the tops of these mountains.
Mm-hmm.
There might be some scrubby bushes, but like it even like throws that into the story. It's like, oh yeah, well some people say it was this one because this one has better saplings,
Yeah.
but Mount Riggy also does not have trees.
Yeah.
um, but it's like there's just like there's something interesting about that. Like what does it mean for the cooper to climb the mountain in order to get the materials to make his barrels? And I think it's very closely relating. It's very closely related to what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have to like undergo this hardship and this temptation in order to like I don't know, acquire the things that you need in order to I don't know, contain the goodness and the usefulness of the world.
Yeah, I mean, you can say like in a traditional mythic story, what a hero does is he goes into the realm of like chaos and formless potential and
Yeah.
draws out the materials that he then uses to build civilization out of.
Right.
So, like a tree or a forest is like, wilderness and mystery.
Mhm.
But what people do is we take that unformed potential and we cut it into boards or timbers and we make houses out of it.
Right.
So again, like a cooper is like he will go into that realm of mystery in a way and draw out what's useful to people.
Yeah, and
Also, he said it was saplings, I think, in the story that he was making it out of, which is a curious. I don't know that I've seen a barrel that was made of saplings. So,
yeah, well, I think the idea is like it's small trees that you can easily like split into planks.
yeah,
Like I don't know that it's like you're lashing
okay,
a bunch of saplings around, but anyway.
okay. So maybe a
um,
little bigger than what we have in mind when we say saplings.
yeah, right. That might be a translation
Yeah, okay.
issue. Um,
I did start to say one other thing about the Cooper, and I think there was a little bit of connection problem there. Um, in this, you can kind of do with this what you will. I don't know how relevant it will be, but in the York mystery plays, this is in York, in England. Um, the Coopers Guild puts on the play of the Fall of Man, and I think in the Chester plays the Coopers put on the Scourging of Christ. And there's if you're like bending metal bands, and I mean there's like some metal working involved in making a barrel. And so if there's metal working involved, then you have like this somewhat violent craft.
mhm.
Um, and maybe that's part of the reason, but I don't know exactly. I can't give a really tight explanation for why they put on those two plays, the fall of man, and the scourging of Christ. But yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to like the Pilate detail, I mean, there's maybe something of the violence of the craft too that connects them to that story.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not sure what to think with that.
Um, oh, and then you'd asked about Pilate and his connection with dragons. Um, he's maybe one is you could just say like he's apparently not a good authority figure, and where you have like corrupt authority, then you might also have dragons and monsters and that. But actually, usually that seems like that's the successful leader, that the successful tyrant that has dragons working for him.
Mm-hmm.
But Pilate also, I mean, of the few lines that he has in Scripture, one of them is his question, "What is truth?"
Right.
And this is like um, a release of everything that's like sensible, um, and like it's sort of like caving into chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a depressed and aimless person that asks what is truth.
Right.
Like that's how you answer somebody in like in an argument or in a discussion, is like just falling back on like what even is truth. So there's the kind of formlessness of that maybe that's um, the kind of exclamation that puts you in contact with the dragon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because like at the same time, like that would be a pretty normal response for a Roman of Pilate's like status and time period when faced with I don't know, with Jesus and his claims of truth. You know, Rome does have like a pretty, I don't know, I almost like a relativistic sense of morality and truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I mean, there's that element as well. But it's like
Yeah, but
it is.
that doesn't neither like affirm or deny like
Yeah, I
what are
know.
the consequences of having that position.
Yeah, right. That's where I was going to go next. Is like there is actually a valid reason why around that time and after that time, um, like the Roman people are like increasingly dissatisfied with their pagan system because like it really is, I don't know, like everything that you were just describing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I just
and
I do think so. This is not a motif that is unique to this story. So like like the most prominent example that I would think of this would actually be Mount Hermon in like the Mount Hermon of the Bible. It's on the border of Israel and Lebanon today. But just like this idea that you climb up this mountain and then from the mountain descend into basically into hell, which I think is like kind of what's happening in this story with the Cooper, because like he climbs up the mountain and then falls into the abode of dragons,
mm-hmm.
like the underworld, basically. Because like you have to understand that a dragon is in medieval legendarium and hagiography, like a dragon is basically a demon. But it's like not necessarily a demon in the same way that a modern person is going to understand a demon. Very often in these hagiographies, dragons are very, very clearly a representation of like demonic tyranny. And so like there is this sense in which a dragon is on the one hand a chaos monster, and on the other hand a monster of tyranny.
Yeah. So Carl Jung would describe a dragon as being like when you have a system that no longer serves its purpose, but still oppresses you, because like any system oppresses you. I mean, like
Right.
restricts your individuality or whatever you could say. So like you give up something of yourself in order to be a part of a system, but that's okay if the system is good and is making your life better and your family life better and everything. But if again,
No.
he would say if you have a system that's no longer serving its purpose, but you're still a slave to it, then you have a dragon. And he would say that in part based on medieval hagiography, and in part based on like sort of like dream therapy, analyzing patients' dreams.
Also, Carl Jung was Swiss.
Yeah.
So like he's actually he's very closely connected to these very stories that we're telling.
Right.
This culture.
So anyways, that just kind of connects like the tyranny. What I said, like when you have a successful tyrant, then he'll have dragons working for him.
Mm-hmm.
And like Pharaoh's magicians with all their snakes, and like I think their name for the magician is just means serpent.
Yeah.
And so like Pharaoh would be the kind of like the quintessential example, I suppose, of the tyrannical leader, who's like strong and order and in control of everything, and there are snakes that are just like hiding right underneath the surface there.
Yeah, but so like an interesting thing to bring into that is that the bronze serpent is an icon of Christ in the Old Testament, and like pretty explicitly explained to us in the New Testament. But then also like the word seraph, where we get seraphim, it means serpent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is that an Egyptian word, or is that just another Hebrew word that means serpent?
Boy, I don't know if it's imported into Hebrew. I mean, it's a Hebrew word, but
right, yeah, I know it's a Hebrew word, but for some reason I had in my mind that it was imported from Egyptian, but maybe I'm mistaken. But so like there is this element in the Old Testament and in the biblical text in the Christian tradition, in which a serpent is simultaneously like a representation of Satan, and of demonic forces, but also like of this angelic power and even Christ himself.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's part of what's going on with what we're talking about with the dragons. I think I don't know how far we want to go tonight talking about dragons, because we're gonna have quite a lot more dragon stories to tell.
Yeah. I mean, just in the context of that story, you have Moses's staff becoming a serpent and eating the serpents of the magicians.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So even before you get like we'll say like more developed or like completed New Testament vision, like even in that little tiny story itself, you have the two serpents facing each other.
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah, and I think people often forget that a seraph or the seraphim, that they are serpentine, and that the imagery there is serpentine. Like we like to think of angels in modern terms as, I don't know, rather human-like.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not necessarily the symbolism that's used. I don't know, biblically, you would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how much further? I don't know. Do we want to go much further with these stories tonight, or?
Well, I mean, we can go back to Pilate. Okay, so some of the dragon stuff and the Carl Jung I brought up with Pilate in mind also, because you were talking about paganism falling apart shortly after, when you have this relativistic what is truth, but you also have like this ancient system that's seems like, I guess we're still doing this anyways, even though it doesn't seem good.
Mm-hmm.
Which is by Carl Jung's idea of dragons, anyways. Like that's when you would expect this to become a dragon for people, if it hadn't been already,
Right.
But yeah, we don't have to go on with more on dragons. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to say.
I mean, there's a lot more I want to say about dragons, but like I said, I think I want to hold on to some of that for now because we're going to be talking about dragons quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because
No,
like
just anything
I
else
said,
on Pilate. I don't want to go on dragons anymore, really, right now. But if we wanted to say anything in returning back to Pilate.
I'm trying to look at the.
In Hebrew, saraf means burning.
Yeah.
So it looks like it is a Hebrew word, and is usually used to denote a serpent. And so that's like a reference to venom, as it's
Yes.
applied to serpents, but it looks like a Hebrew word.
Right. I don't know. I like just going back to Pilate. Now, of course, I think we can understand the symbolism of Pilate and his connection with storms. And, like storms being like a symbol of torment and torture, like spiritual anguish, and like the degree of spiritual anguish that that Pilate is undergoing because of his sin and of his actions is like so extreme. I mean, that's one thing I see kind of in these medieval stories about Pilate. Like the anguish of Pilate is so extreme that like it manifests itself in the world as literal storms. Um, and again, like I said, these stories are like are pointing to theological concepts, and I hope like we've kind of brought that out already with our talks about these dragons and things like that. Um, Actually, I'm looking at the comment section here, and I see we have a question from Grateful that actually kind of relates. I think it actually ties nicely in where he is talking about how he is struggling. Like he's asking, why does God allow us to struggle so much with sin? Talking about it being a lifelong struggle, and the more he goes along, the more we realize our deep sinfulness and our need for Jesus. And then ask the question, is the dragon a tempter? And I think that actually relates really, really closely with what we're talking about. Um, because there is this sense as well in which a dragon, and this ties back to what you were saying earlier, John, about Jesus going into the wilderness to face temptation, because there is also this sense in which the dragon represents temptation, and that kind of ties nicely back in with our talking about the sign of the cross and the cross as being like the weapons by which the saints defeat the dragons. um like, and we think also like, the sign of the cross and the power of the cross and the uplifting of the cross and so forth in Christianity is the means by which we defeat the serpent, or by which we defeat the dragons. And like theologically, that is what's going on in these stories. Like it is, um at least in part, like this representation of here is how we fight the dragon of temptation, like the dragon that's raging within our own souls. Um, so, like, yes, there is definitely this element, like you bring in that dragon. A dragon does represent temptation, but like how that ties into like the other story with the dragons as helpers is that when contained by the power of the cross, temptation actually works to our salvation. And I think the Bible, like St. Paul, brings that out pretty clearly. I'm thinking of things like Romans 8:21, where he says, like, all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. It's like, all things, of course, that includes temptation. Like St. Paul's story with his thorn in the flesh and asking for it to be removed from him. And God's answer back to him is like, no. I'm not going to, because like these temptations. Um, I don't know. I think for me that's actually a very very important concept because Christianity actually doesn't promise us to be free of temptation. Rather, like it promises us more that like these the temptation will be contained and we can overpower it. And I think that's one reason why I like these Swiss stories of dragons so much, and why there's always this warning along with them about, you remove the cross, you let the cross fall, and you neglect the cross, then the dragon's going to come back, because it's like we stop fighting temptation by the power of the cross, then the temptation turns on us and overpowers us.
Yeah, and I mentioned the sign of the cross in St. George, but in lots of medieval stories, you have your heroes making the sign of the cross over themselves, and some of it you can say is like symbolic storytelling, and some of it is like really encouraging you, like do this when you're when you're confronting obstacles in your life.
Yeah, right.
Like the stories actually are telling you, like, here's a practice that you can have when you're going in to face temptation, because now you have like the physical sense of like of the cross of Christ overlaying my own body,
Right.
And that's the way you walk into that situation of facing that dragon.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's like I don't know. There's all kinds of thoughts. I don't know. I don't want to say there's a lot I want to say, but I don't want to go too far into it again, because there's so many more stories to tell that are going to bring out these points very very clearly. But I don't know. I think it's useful at the same time to kind of lay this foundation as we go into these stories. I think next time, the next story I would really like to deal with, probably next week, because I want to spend a lot of time really studying it and all of the different sources and all the versions of this legend, is the story of Saint Beatus, who is a local saint. But like the stories around him are just fantastic. We've already talked some about the story of Saint Stephen, not the Saint Stephen in the Bible, a local Swiss saint, Saint Stephen, associated with the Theban Legion. I think it actually would be useful to revisit that story at one point, because I've uncovered some additional sources that really add to the story compared to the source that we previously were using. But yeah, there's just I don't know, there's just so many fantastic elements, and like I said, there's something to me that really speaks to me about, like, within these dragon stories, these uh the way they're told in this region, and that's I don't know. I'm excited to dive into these stories and bring out those things. But yeah, like I said, I think it's nice to kind of go over what is kind of like the elements that we're going to see recurring over and over and over again in these stories. Um, and hopefully we're going to bring in some other mythical creatures as well. I'm also kind of excited to talk about Swiss dwarves. I like them quite a lot. And also the Wild Hunt. I've been doing some research. I was doing some research yesterday on Wild Hunt stories from the Alps in Central Europe, and there's some neat things there. The Wild Hunt is a pretty, like, it's a pretty great motif that exists. I think it's pretty universal in Europe, all over Europe. It's definitely not unique to Switzerland at all. And it's something that's like prominent in both Germanic and Celtic mythologies, and you kind of get both elements colliding in the Swiss legends, because like so much of Swiss legendary culture is actually like this really interesting combination of Germanic and Celtic elements. So yeah, like I'm pretty excited to look at all of those things as we go forward. I don't know if you have anything to add, John. I think we've been going for a long time.
No, not really. The Great Hunt also has an important place in cowboy culture,
Yeah,
thanks to thanks to a
yeah,
song.
all right. I mean, it's not really thanks to that song. It actually was pretty
Well,
important in cowboy.
sort of. I mean, yeah, because I mean, the guy wrote the song because it was a story that he heard. You know, I mean, it was
Yeah,
something
right.
that came down to him through cowboy folk culture.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, well, let's not say too
but
much about that. Let's just leave that as a teaser for our
yeah, okay,
our
that's fine.
wild hunt talks that are to come in the future.
Yeah,
So we'll talk about Perchta and Berchtold and Odin and all of these other spirits associated with the wild hunt and how this kind of gets um, Christianized and what it has to do with cowboys.
yeah,
So that's something that's to come in the future as well. Um, hopefully you guys enjoy this content. I really love these medieval stories, these more legendary things. And like I said, there's a very really valuable way, and I think it was kind of exemplified tonight in our conversation with Grateful JM, how 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 these stories really do theology in an incredible way, and like teach us things. I don't know, teach us things in a way that if we're trying to like directly teach on these things, we're not going to do it as well.
yeah. The story. I mean, any story is there to speak to your real life.
Right. I think I'm ready to close. John, do you have any closing remarks, or should we just say bye?
No, that's good with me. Thank you guys for tuning in, and grateful JM. We do appreciate the comments there.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a bunch of other comments earlier on. I think most of those people aren't here anymore, or their comments were just crazy nonsense, which that's fine. So yeah, thanks again everybody for tuning in. Whether you're watching this, whether you're with us live, joining in the conversation, or if you're watching this after the fact. I know most of our views for these videos come well after actually live streaming. So leave your comments if you're watching this later. Thanks, Grateful JM, for your subscription, and others who subscribed as well. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate your questions, your comments. Even if we don't answer your comments directly in the comment section, a lot of time that's because, like for example, if you've left a comment on one of the videos recently and I haven't answered it right away, that might be because I'm considering doing a video in it in response to your comments. So
Are you thinking about doing one about whether P Diddy is the Antichrist?
yes, I think maybe that'll be my that'll be my video for tomorrow.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. That I think qualifies as the nonsense category that I
Well, it
described.
could be a catchy way to open an interesting discussion anyway.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe maybe there's more value to that question than I'm giving it credit for at
Yeah.
face value. So yeah. Anyway, thanks everybody, and until next time, wish you all peace in Christ.